So thank you so much, everybody, for attending tonight in our the latest in the community conversations series that we have with SHENLA. And so tonight we're going to be discussing the poverty report that was recently released. But before we begin, I'm just going to do a land acknowledgement.
Okay.
Okie.
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 Okie and welcome.
We acknowledge that we're gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains.
We pay respect to the Blackfoot peoples past,
Present.
and future. We recognize the thousands of Indigenous peoples
From many diverse nations.
Call Lethbridge home.
Including members of the Blackfoot Confederacy,
the six gates of the beat.
Akana,
Siksika.
Amskapi people.
As well as other First Nations,
Métis, and Inuit peoples.
We respect Indigenous people's cultural heritage,
Beliefs
Truth
and relationship to the land.
that stretches back in time.
We will not blink at history.
we will not blink at history.
And we will learn from it.
Okie is an invitation.
A step forward.
in Blackfoot, Okie means hello.
Okie means hello.
Hello.
Okie.
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 Okie and welcome to the lands of the Blackfoot people.
So tonight I'm going to act as sort of the moderator between our panelists. And my name is Caroline and I work at the Lethbridge Public Library. I'm one of the librarians. And so before we begin, Sharon's going to sort of give us a background of what SHENLA is and then talk a little bit about the report itself. And then we'll have a few panelists discuss the report. But at any time, if you have any questions that you want me to ask the panelists, just put them in the question and answer portion, and we'll be sure to answer those questions. So I'll pass it on to Sharon now.
There, sorry. Welcome, and SHENLA is an umbrella organization promoting health equity, and our vision is vibrant, inclusive, and safe communities where people from all walks of life are able to meet their basic needs with dignity, participate in community life, and have opportunities for optimal development, well-being, and health. And so that vision of SHENLA is part of what we were looking for to promote in the relation to the poverty report. We'd like to acknowledge the funding from the City of Lethbridge and the Government of Canada in completing this work. And the report was developed by Help Seeker for us, and we collaborated on shaping the focus of the report. I'd also like to acknowledge that United Way is a supporter and collaborating with us on this work on poverty. And Jackie Zeles was unable to be with us tonight. The next slide. And the next one.
Sorry, it seems to be delayed. There you go. Oh.
There we go.
Oh, is that the right one? Okay.
That one. Thank you. So this is a little bit of the focus that SHENLA took. The focus is on child and youth and family poverty in Lethbridge and area. The last report was for the City of Lethbridge, was completed by Vibrant Lethbridge in 2015. So it's been quite a while since we've had a report on poverty, and this is the first one looking at child and youth and family poverty. Next slide. So a few statistics from the report. While poverty has declined somewhat in the last 20 years, poverty is an important social issue in our community and in southwestern Alberta. The report includes data from the 2016 census and the 2019 family low income measure after tax family file data. So when we developed the report, this was the most recent data available. We recognize that a new report is needed as the 21 census data is becoming available. In 2019, 15% of children and youth 0 to 17 years of age were living in low income in Lethbridge, and 47% of children in lone parent families were living in low income. That's just a huge number, the 47%. And based on 2016 data that we had to compare to, 42% of First Nations children living in Lethbridge were in low income families. Next slide. It's important that Lethbridge, to note that Lethbridge has a higher rate of lone parent families in comparison to some other communities in Alberta. So what's the evidence on poverty? Well, we know that poverty is the most influential determinant of health, and the cost of poverty is significant. So doing nothing about it still has significant costs to society. It was estimated that in the province of Alberta, between the cost across systems is between $8 and $11 billion a year because of the cascading impacts of poverty. So addressing child poverty can prevent this kind of cascade of negative impacts over the life course and the cycle of poverty across generations. At a community level, poverty is associated with higher rates of child trauma, ACEs, chronic diseases, addictions, and higher crime rates. And in looking at early child development, poverty impacts early child development. When children aren't able to participate in community life, they tend to have lower school readiness when they start school, and they can struggle more in school. It affects their learning across their school years, but it also affects their health and well-being across the life course. So eliminating poverty is less expensive than ignoring it, and all children in our community should have opportunities for health and well-being. Next slide. So here you can see the distribution of different costs of living across the province. Last year, SHENLA and the United Way of Lethbridge and area joined the Alberta Living Wage Network, and we were able to calculate the living wage for Lethbridge, and that was the first time it had been calculated in 5 years, and it had changed somewhat. It had gone up. So $19 an hour was calculated for Lethbridge, leaving a $4 an hour wage gap between basic income and the cost of living in our community. So this is, we were surprised to find when we calculated this for Lethbridge, that Lethbridge had the highest food costs and the highest electricity costs among cities in Alberta. And we will be working with the United Way and the Alberta Living Wage Network to calculate that living wage again. It will be released in November. So next slide, priorities for action. We presented last week to the City Council's Community Safety Standing Policy Committee. And these are some of the key things that we requested at a city level. But I want to note that, oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the, that's the next slide. I'll show you the priorities for the city on the next slide. This one is, kind of the overview. And we want to work on collective impact, because we know anyone level of government, any single agency cannot end poverty by itself. But through a collaborative effort across society, or at a community level and connected with all levels of government, we can in fact change this. We can end poverty for children. So this is part of a just recovery plan for the pandemic, recovering from the pandemic with a focus on basic rights. And currently the city of Lethbridge lacks a strategy to address poverty. So SHENLA and United Way are focusing on encouraging collaboration and developing that kind of plan. Next slide. So we will be working this fall to engage people with lived experience, Indigenous organizations, and a variety of groups in our community. And we hope to hear from the lived experiences of people living in poverty and to engage them in action to address poverty. And the next slide. And here's our recommendations. I got ahead of myself. So collaboratively, we want to develop a plan to end poverty in Lethbridge with a target date. And we're recommending that we seek to do this in 10 years, over the course of 10 years. And there were the next key priority for us was asking that the city implement a low-income bus pass. And transportation is a major issue that's impacting low-income people in our community. And this also came up in a recent survey completed by United Way. We also suggest that a living wage is a key issue. Several of our SHENLA member organizations have adopted a living wage in the last year. So that's good to see, but we'd like to see the city do that as well and implement that with all their employees and contractors. And the same with social procurement. Any group that you have contracts with, if they also provide a living wage, it makes a huge difference for families in our community. And last slide. So tonight we have 3 speakers who are going to talk about this issue from different perspectives. And I will ask each speaker to introduce themselves, and starting in this order with Tanya first.
Okay. Nisto Anigok Nadwid Spapwakaki. My name is Tanya Pace Crosschild, and I'm the director of Opokaa'sin Early Intervention Society.
Hey, I'm Christina. I am from the Lethbridge School Division. I think probably from the Q&A. I think we're adding Savannah here from Immigrant Services.
Yeah, just give me a second to get the link sent to her. How about if we start with one of the questions and then we'll get Elena joining us. So what information from the report stood out to you, and how does the poverty report to the work relate to the work that your organization does?
Did you want me to go first?
Either or, whatever.
Was that okay, Christina?
Oh yeah, always.
I was really, well, first of all, thank you. I'm very honored to be asked to sit on this panel. I was really impressed with this report because it really gave a very holistic perspective in terms of what poverty really is. And what stood out to me was something that we were always saying as Indigenous people is poverty is not just financial. It's about lack of basic capacity to participate in the community. And because poverty is racialized, a lot of the time, Indigenous families are barriered because of all of those barriers in regards to not only access, but also affordability, but not just because of the affordability. The access comes because of other issues. So that really stood out with me because I think this was really emphasizing that quality of life is not just about finances. It's about human connection. At the basis of it, it's human connection. And in our community is only as great as our least served member of society, as a one that's struggling the most. And I was really impressed with how they talked about well-being. And the Indigenous definition of poverty is lack of wellness and balance, because it's all interrelated. The work that I do at Opokaa'sin is really is actually breaking that cycle of poverty from different standpoints. First of all, not only do we provide early childhood education at no cost, which is a very big barrier for a lot of Indigenous families, we are also a community hub. So it's a place where families can connect and develop those social networks. We provide high quality, low cost daycare, which is another barrier for our families to acquire education or employment. And we provide things holistically. So it's not just focused on the child, but it's focused on the whole family. And that includes extended kin and relations. And we respect and develop those relations between the children and their family. We also at Opokaa'sin provide higher than living wage for our frontline workers. So I'm really proud of that fact, because we have been taking a look at the previous poverty reports and really trying to make sure that we're not being part of the problem itself. One of the neat things about Opokaa'sin that we realized was a real gain for a lot of families is that all of our children are allowed or are given 2 meals a day and 2 snacks a day. And you may not see that as a big issue, but to families that are living below the poverty line, that's a big one for them. And they've acknowledged that having those nutritious hot meals is a real big kind of draw to the program itself as well. And one of the things that really stood out for me with this report was that how a social safety network has to be in place. And that's what Opokaa'sin does. It provides that social safety network. So when we have families that are multi-barriered to becoming a part of the community, whether it be from finances or just not having the access and those hidden accesses. And this is where I learned, and I was really retrospective to my organization, is how are we, I mean, we always say, you know, we have wait lists for our programs, but internally, how do we audit ourselves to realize, to acknowledge, or to take a look at ourselves and how we might be contributing to some of these barriers for these families. And one of the things that stood out to me is we don't provide transportation, and transportation was a big one in this report. And if you look at it, I just had you know, like we were talking about, a mom that lives on the west side that wants her 3 children to be involved in our center, but doesn't have a vehicle. And you can't, like, I can't imagine a mom getting up at 7 in the morning to take her kids on the bus in the middle of January to a facility, and then having to come back to go to attend university. So these are the things that we have to really kind of look at. And I always believe that there's always room for improvement, and really this report was just was really well done. And I applaud the authors and SHENLA for initiating this, because I know about the 2015 report, because that was a lot of discussion around that one. So, and I do believe that child poverty can be eradicated. I do believe that if we come together, if there's more knowledge to our community at large about the effects that poverty has on society as a whole, that we can address these in our different corners. So thank you. I hope I answered the question.
I think that was a really good answer. Yeah. Christina, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, Tanya, brilliant as always. Inspiring as always the vision for the future for children. So good. Yeah, so I guess on behalf of the school division, you know, kind of looking through the report, I would echo the same. I mean, this report is so valuable to the conversation. I think having the collated data in this way that sort of shares the narrative of child and family poverty affirms what everyone on the panel, and, you know, looking at the attendee list, everyone in the room knows, right? We know that child poverty continues to exist, and we know that families continue to struggle. We know that you know, lone parent families continue to face some of the deepest experience of poverty. We know that the interlocking barriers of you know, refugee resettlement, or of you know, racism against Indigenous peoples, again, you know, lack of sustainable housing, of affordable housing, that, you know, access to doctors, like that. We know that poverty is a very big umbrella, and that it is impacted by many things. It impacts many things, and so it's always nice to see it tied together in a report more eloquently than I can ever share. And when it comes to, you know, education from the Lethbridge School Division, of course, again, like everyone here, like we see it every day, right? As the proud place where many, you know, thousands of children and their families come to access services every single day, we know that this is real. You know, the piece that really stood out to me was, I heard a saying the other day, was not as bad as you think, but not as good as you want. I'm glad to see, you know, the rate of child poverty decreasing. I know for a long time, it was, you know, this is like 1 in 5, being this sort of like banner for Lethbridge, like this is what we're facing here. And to see it decrease a little bit to that 15%, sort of that 3 in 20, is good. But when we think about the fact that we have increased in population, it's still more human beings, right? It's still more tiny people in our community who continue to face poverty. And when we think about it from a classroom perspective, 3 in 20, I would, you know, while schools try to make best with what they can for reducing class sizes, we know that there are very few classes with less than 20. So we have at least, you know, demographically speaking, 3 children per classroom who are facing pretty immense odds to their well-being and to their access to education. And so when we're thinking about that 15%, 4,000 children, 4,000 children in our communities, more than that, who are facing poverty, facing access, you know, challenging access to housing, to food, coming to school with empty bellies. And, you know, I would struggle to learn if I didn't have breakfast. And we have, you know, schools making huge strides with access to, you know, universal food, universal breakfast, lunch programs, partnership with Food Bank for Mindful Munchies, you know, has made a huge difference. But we continue to see the struggle with food, with transportation, both to school, after school, to, you know, the activities that make life full, right? And develop whole human beings in childhood, give children access to play. The access to things like preschool care when families are faced between, you know, do I put my kiddo in all-day childcare, which is also very valuable. But as schools, we also see, you know, the value in the preschool and kindergarten programs that we have there with access to, you know, provincially funded support services. We want to make sure that kiddos that need that early intervention at a school level have it. But if they don't have the option to choose that, you know, what does that mean for families? And thinking about just like the day-to-day things that poverty looks like in our schools, it's kiddos without alarm clocks who can't make it to school on time, right? Because they can't buy an alarm clock. That don't have, you know, a permanent address and are couch surfing with auntie this week and maybe grandma next week, and getting a little bit farther and farther away from school every single time they have to move couches. And maybe it's just not possible to get to school today because it's, you know, an extra 10 blocks. Maybe it's now we're on the west side and school's on the south side, and we don't really want to tell them that we had to move again. And so we don't have school today again, right? So how do we work together to make sure that kiddos have access to everything that they need, like we said, under that big umbrella of, you know, poverty, but realistically wellness, right? Not looking just to eradicate poverty, but to promote well-being among children. So really appreciated the report and the opportunity to really explore the numbers about what this looks like, and feel it affirmed, right? I think, again, everyone in this room sees what this looks like every single day, and seeing the numbers on the page is like, yep, that feels right. So thanks for SHENLA for bringing that to life for us.
Thanks, Christina. Who would like to speak next? And maybe because you missed the introduction part, could you just introduce who you are and what organization you are coming from?
I can go next. My name is Savannah Prosu. I work with Lethbridge Family Services. I'm the Resettlement Assistance Program Manager. So I work primarily in the resettlement of our government-assisted refugees in the community of Lethbridge. And just what Christina and Tanya and everybody else has been saying so far, it's affirming, and it's so you feel vindicated on one hand, but also very disappointed on the other hand. That this is just the state of things. I find it particularly interesting on our perspective, seeing newcomers who, you know, there's a lot of myths out there about how much money newcomers get when they first come to Canada. But the ironic thing is that as soon as they come to Canada with the assistance that they're provided by the government, they're actually placed within the cycle of poverty. And we all know that once you're inside of that cycle of poverty, or how difficult it is to get out of there. So it becomes part of our work and part of the work of our community to try and work with these families already in a very disadvantaged place. And so that just strikes me that there's a system in which where we actually place people in poverty and expect them. We really place very high expectations on them. And this is not even just for newcomers. I feel like it's for many people in poverty. There's that expectation that you will lift yourself up by the bootstraps and get yourself out. And we all know just how challenging that is when there's no systems put in place for them to do so. And what Tanya was saying about the lack of transportation really hits home for us as well. We've got so many newcomers who have to be very strategic about where they choose to live in the community. And then they find out that the transportation system is very challenging and very expensive. And so then we have folks who are buying cars and that they can't afford. And so the cycle continues. The affordable housing crisis is compounding all of these issues. So again, it's affirming, but it's just disappointing that this is the case.
Thanks, Savannah. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. So my name is John Lafferty, and I also work for Lethbridge Family Services, Immigrant Services Department. And I've got nothing further to add to that question because you've pretty much all answered it.
Sounds good. So another question that we have is, can you give any examples of how poverty is impacting the children and families you work with? I know some have given in the previous question, but I wondered if anybody had any other examples that they wanted to share.
I would like to. I'd like to share a good success story. I've personally have witnessed families come out of poverty while their children are attending the center. And I'll give you kind of a scenario. Usually we have families that are coming in where mom may or may not be a single mother, but she's going to school, trying to get her education, and has children at the center or a child at the center, and we try and provide those wraparound social supports and networking and everything. And they come through the center and they get a little bit more than what a normal daycare or childcare center or preschool or kindergarten would get. And in terms of parent education, parental support, those nights where they can connect with other families that are struggling. So access to natural support networks or creation of. And they've gone through and gotten their degrees, and they come back and they're so proud. And you see it, you see the difference in the demeanor of the family, especially the mothers, that they're so proud and that they're able to provide for their children, that they have access to a lot more employment opportunities that their education has been able to afford them. But also they turn around and they're able to give more of their time voluntarily to Opokaa'sin or to other families, because they know how it feels to be struggling. So it's really important for us to, yes, acknowledge the report and the all of the data that says how detrimental it is, but it is achievable to get out of poverty and to make a difference. And I've seen it in the span of the 5 years that children come through our center and that are really actively engaged with our staff. And I've seen that time and time again. So I know that it is doable. But I also wanted to point out one thing too. Poverty, when our mothers, so we have this one thing called this project that is funded out of the University of Lethbridge through the MasterCard Foundation. It's called the Blackfoot Women's Empowerment Program. And it's basically taking a look at, we have a lot of families that moms make ribbon skirts, or they bead something, earrings or whatnot, and they bring it into the center to sell to the staff or to other mothers, or they'll put it on Facebook. And that kind of gets them a little bit more income, short term, but some income, maybe start of school, or kids are wanting to play hockey and they're trying to make their own money. And so we started to look at the possibility of developing a Blackfoot Women's Cooperative, where the women could bring all their artwork and what they're selling together at one place, so somebody could purchase them. And it's just something that kind of a spin-off to this whole poverty report on when you empower the mother, especially the matriarch, and I'm speaking from Indigenous families, you really see a boost to the whole family, right? And then there's other spin-off effects to it. So I'm just really proud of the work that the women are doing in my community to create those opportunities for each other. So yes, I've seen poverty. We could talk about poverty. I think we've all seen it, and sometimes it's hidden, but it's there. But we also have to acknowledge the success stories as well, and that there is a pathway out of here, and it doesn't take much if collectively society would pay attention to it and be take the next steps to address it in the corners of their world.
That was really wonderful. Thanks, Tanya. Would anybody else like to share? Oh, Savannah?
Yeah, just to give some numbers to folks to kind of give an example of how we see families struggling with poverty and kids struggling with poverty. So some of the most common demographics that we see for newcomers are couples with 2 children or single parents with 3 children. And just looking at what a single parent with 3 children, what the amount of money that they receive from government assistance during that first year that they come into Canada is only about $1,500 per month. And $599 of that is reserved for their shelter cost. So the government of Canada basically expects a family of 4, a single mother with 3 children, to find a rental property for $599. We all know that doesn't exist. And yes, there are opportunities for minimal top-ups to help pay for higher cost. But again, just going back to my point before, that essentially these families are put into the cycle of poverty and have to work their way out. So we're constantly seeing single moms predominantly struggling with this. With 3 children, you can imagine, and we've seen this in many instances where 3 children of different age groups, and they're going to different school levels. So you might have somebody in high school, middle school, and elementary school, where they all 3 have different school start and finish times. And the parent is half of their job every day is running around picking their kids up or taking them to school. And that leaves very little time in the day for them to go and learn English so that they can get jobs. So again, you see that cycle of poverty continue after that mother has finished her first year in Canada and has a very, very low language levels and now is struggling to find employment. So these are the kinds of things that we see impacting parents and children in our line of work every day.
Thanks, Savannah. Does anybody else have anything they wish to add to that? Yeah, Christina?
Yes, I was going to add to that. The impact on children is that children can't be children. They're not allowed to be children. They have to take on additional responsibilities, additional roles, particularly if you're an elder child, you probably have a whole lot of household chores because parents are working additional jobs to keep the family afloat. There's a responsibility to look after some of the younger children. And so when their friends and peers are participating in community events and social events, hockey for example, or any other sporting activities, they can't do that because they're at home providing that home support whilst parents are out working. And the other impact on children is that they are attractive prospect for grooming by criminal gangs. And so because the gangs are not daft and they see these individuals, these children, they use them for their drug running activities. They target them because they are impacted. They don't have that social network, and they also know that the children are below the legal age of where they won't get a severe punishment that perhaps an adult who's involved in those sort of activities would do as well. So in all, the children aren't allowed to be kids. They miss out on child life.
Thanks, John. Christina, did you want to add something?
Sure, actually, it was going to be very similar, John. I would completely agree. I think the special piece about this report is that it's about children. And I think when we come back to what do we want for children, it's well-being, it's wholeness. It is the opportunity for them to be the beautiful self of child, right? And in the education setting, that means we want them to have the opportunity to learn. Every child is a learner, right? Every child craves growth and learning because they are wired for it. They are built to be learners, and formal education is one avenue of learning, of course. But when we see children who are struggling with poverty, just like John said, they don't get that opportunity, not really, right? We can build beautiful schools, we can have fabulous teachers, which we do, we have fabulous educators and staff throughout our schools, but when they also have to be social workers, and they have to be fundraisers, and they have to be babysitters after school, that's not what children get, right? They don't get the opportunity to learn to their fullest opportunity. They don't get to engage in play fully because they're too tired to run, because they were at the ER for 7 hours last night, because they didn't have a family doctor, because their parent doesn't have a flexible job, because they're in precarious employment, so they couldn't go to the doctor when a new one finally opened up to try to get an appointment, right? The layers of complexity of poverty impact every single day for children. And we want all of the children in our school division to be becoming able to learn because we know that they want to. And so when we see children struggling with the impacts of poverty, we know that they're not getting their best opportunity for education, or for play, or for joy, or for connection and relationship. And really that's what we're looking for. And like Tanya said, I truly believe we can eradicate child poverty, and I can see what that would mean, right? If you can imagine, like every child walking into our schools had a full belly, meaningful connection in the morning before they came, had the opportunity to play, had opportunity to grow their skills in school and after school. Imagine the community. Oh, it would be so beautiful. I know we can do it. Be so good.
Thanks, Christina. Tana, do you have something that you wish to add?
Yes, I forgot one important thing that really stood out in this report to me, because I already knew it, but it's not been articulated, I think, very well to the general public. And that's that when there are incidences of poverty, child poverty, there's also the increased rates of child apprehension by child protection workers of especially Indigenous families. And so when they put the little ticky box on the reason why they're apprehended, it's neglect. And we know that from research that there are 4 domains why children are apprehended by the child welfare system across Canada. It's of course abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, exposure to domestic violence, and neglect. And when they looked at that report from McGill, when they compared it to the general population versus the Indigenous population, what they found was that Indigenous people, for the most part, the highest incidence of their reason for coming into care was neglect. But when you look at the report, and it says clearly on there that neglect, one of the subcategories of neglect is child or caregiver poverty, poor housing, and substance misuse. And we know that's all tied back into poverty. So, you know, it's another system, colonial system, that has been oppressing. And it is racialized. You know, poverty is racialized because there's no way of getting out of it. It's the system. You're banging your head against the system, trying to get a better life for your family, but then you're struggling with all of this because now you have also child welfare saying that you're being neglectful, even though poverty is something that, you know, is affecting the entire family. So I just wanted to point that out because it's really important. A lot of people don't know that and how it's connected. So thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. Another question for our panel is, what report recommendation or recommendations would you like most to see implemented, and why?
I just want to say it's an unfair question because I want all of them. Yeah, they're great recommendations, and I think they tap into what those of us who are working in the sector, as well as like the community of individuals experiencing poverty, want as well. They want us to work together. They want to stop having to go to 700 appointments to try to get one thing, right? They want to not have to figure out how to get there between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday, because they also have jobs that they're trying to keep so they can keep their house, right? They want us to work together because we know, this is what we know about, you know, brains who have experienced trauma, and poverty and ongoing poverty is trauma. Is future forecasting is very challenging. It is physically almost impossible with deep levels of trauma to plan ahead. It's really hard to case manage your own life is near impossible when you are trying to stay afloat, right? We know that. So we know that parents, and especially now through COVID, especially these lone parents who were already facing disproportionate amounts of poverty, who then had to parent multiple children from home online schooling, was like an unfathomable time, right? They want us to get ourselves together so they don't have to do it all for us. And I say this often, and I truly believe it. You know, I really think that Lethbridge is at a pivotal moment. You know, we're at this, 100,000 cusp, and, sometimes over, sometimes not, depending on the census, but we're at a moment where we can either grow together or we can grow apart. And the effort that everyone in social community services, in natural networks put in to try to keep the city united is astronomical. When we talk about the cost of fighting poverty instead of just like dealing with it, the amount of effort that I know, even just when I look at this panel, the amount of work that Savannah and John put in, that Tanya and her team put in, that Sharon and Shenla and everyone on this call and the library puts in to try to just hold it together is astronomical. The amount of staff time, people time, and the amount, and still on top of that, individuals experiencing poverty put in double that, triple that, 4 times that, working to keep their life organized, on track, and promoting the well-being of their children. They're working so hard, and we need to meet them there. So I really want to see us as a city grow together and really take advantage of this opportunity, because this is a once in a city, sort of city history time, right? As we grow, this is our one chance. If we're as big as Calgary, we don't get a chance to do it again. You don't re-get together. This is it. So I'd really like to see that recommendation of aligning those social services and working together. Schools are often seen as a hub of community, but schools can't do it all. And the government cutting funding to social services is one of the ways that they try to put things in schools, right? Schools are there for education. We want to be a critical partner with community networks to support families and children. Social services can't do it all. Schools can't do it all. Families can't do it all. We need to work together.
Thanks, Christina. Would anybody else like to answer that question? Tanya?
Yeah, I keep muting and unmuting because I don't want to talk too much. I'm very passionate about this because I know that there is a solution to it. And I think just those little things added up that we can do in the community to raise awareness about how poverty impacts even the parents that have children that are in the schools. They say, you don't realize how marginalizing it is or oppressive it is when you have those hot lunch programs where you have to pay $5 for your child to get a dry old piece of pizza every Friday or something. The hot lunch that I'm talking about, where you have to pay, it's minimal, but when my children were in elementary school, I made an effort to say, how many kids don't usually order this pizza or this hot lunch and then give a little bit of extra if I had it, so that those kids don't feel like they're left out when it comes to basic, like, we're human beings. It's food. Feed the children, like, it takes somebody from a classroom, another parent. You don't have to have a title. You don't have to be a part of government. You don't have to have a lot of money to make a lot of change in your community if the effort is put forward. But we have to start changing the narrative that poverty is something happens because people aren't, and I like the quote that somebody said, pulling up their own bootstraps. They're lazy. Poor people are lazy and they can't make ends meet, so therefore it's their problem. No, it's not. It's like we've learned from like we know from the work we do, and the report states there's all these other factors in place, but it takes those little efforts. And if a community can show that they really are committed to this, others follow suit. We have to, because those are our elected officials. We elect them in, so they have to follow suit to the voice that we're putting emphasis on. So I just wanted to share that. I believe all the recommendations are worthy, but we have to start somewhere. Let's start there, like every one of us.
Thanks, Tanya.
I think for myself, and this might just be taking the easy road, but the basic income and the living wage to me really resonates. And I don't think it's just about simply changing or making the expectation that folks will go from $15 to $19 and leaving it there. It's always a work in progress, and that needs to be where we get to. It needs to be, let's get to that $19 living wage and making sure that all of our families within Lethbridge are making that living. So that way, as our food prices are increasing and our shelter prices are increasing and everything else is around us, then that way at least families have a little bit of that extra money in their pockets to be able to make ends meet. But don't end it there. It needs to be something that is reevaluated on a consistent basis. And, employers, government, municipal governments, provincial, federal governments, we all need to get behind it and make sure that these things are addressed on a regular basis, because today the living wage might be $19, but if in 3 years the living wage becomes $25 and we're not moving to that pace, then we're just going to continue being in the same circle. So for me, it's really just tackling that issue and making sure that it becomes something that's just, it's something that we work on all the time.
Thanks, Savannah. John?
Following on from what Savannah says, I noticed it was a 10-year target, and is it in 10 years that it's going to be $19 an hour as the living wage? Is that the intent? Because that points towards what Savannah was saying about how this being a work in progress. So in terms of the recommendations, it's all of the above. Where I can't pick out one in particular that I would say was detailed, but one of the recommendations I thought which demonstrates a commitment from the City of Lethbridge is the $19 an hour living wage to all their contractors, because that would signal their commitment to defeat poverty. The subsidised transportation one is also a good one. This year, the city allocated some funding for newcomer bus passes. That quickly run out. Savannah managed to engage with the city and secure some additional funds for some additional bus passes from the city to take it to the end of the year. And that's been a great initiative by the city.
I think you guys are giving me way too much credit for this. I had nothing to do with it. So the city just went and approved it themselves. I didn't have anything to do with actually getting it.
Take the win.
So I think we have time for one more question. And that's a question from the audience. So obviously, people that are on the panel and probably a lot of people that are attending, this is an area of importance to them. And, they support the information that was released in the report, but how do you get that information then into the hands, into the minds of, our elected officials? We're going to be going into an election in 2023 provincially. And obviously we are city council. So we want to, keep this information at the forefront in our community and really get that information across to elected officials. So the person just was wondering, it feels like they're kind of beating a dead horse, like it's just constantly trying to put out that information. But, what does the panel feel would be a good course of action to sort of continuing the messaging and to really really resonate it with elected officials?
Can I answer that one? Or
yes.
Add to that one? Back in 2015, I remember they had a subcommittee, like a community committee of people that were wanting to take a look at poverty and eradicating poverty. That's where the 2015 report came. And then all of a sudden there was nothing until SHENLA came along and got this report done. Is it possible to mobilize community to be a part of this as a bigger committee that we strike up as concerned and committed citizens to really kind of publicly make people aware? And they did a really good public campaign and push for that back in, I don't know if Lori, one of the participants, I'm pretty sure she might have been a part of that one. The Vibrant Lethbridge Committee. Anyways, it was I've been on so many committees, but it was a committee committed to eradicating poverty, child poverty. And then it went by the wayside after the report was done and all the fireworks were released. And then there was no follow-up. There was nothing. But I think having that community initiate that, people who are dedicated to doing something about it and holding our elected officials accountable might be the first step. I don't know.
Thanks, Tanya. Anybody else want to reflect on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, while the school board is like a minor elected area, I mean, it really does matter that we are all partners with various levels of government, right, in various ways. And how do we use that position to lift up the voices of those that we are working with, right? I think, by nature of politics, you get farther and farther away from the folks that it's for, right? Because, there's a piece of governance that is like a little bit far away for a purpose, right? But how do we bring, not just like lift up voices, and it's not, about like hearing, what's the piece about hearing those who aren't heard, or those who don't have a voice, like speak for those who don't have a voice. Everyone has a voice. Like, we need to listen to it, and we need to make sure that those of us who have the mic or are at the table aren't just lifting it up, but like bringing people with us, so at the school board, things like we've got community engagement committee, we've got, all of our school trustees go to school council meetings to speak with families, we visit schools. Those are the things I want to see from elected officials, from executives at nonprofits. I want to see us all on the floor speaking with the folks that we are working with, because it's not for them, it's with them, right? And those of us who have that position now, how do we model that and show that that's what we expect of our peers who hold similar positions? And that when we get to those tables, we say, this is what I'm doing, how are you doing it, right? And when we have contracts and we have relationships and we have shared committees and working groups, that we're, not backing down on the things that are important to the folks that we're working with.
Thanks, Christina. We have a few minutes for any other additional thoughts on that. Savannah or John?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is kind of similar to Christina as well. I think even as somebody who works within the nonprofit sector and works with people in poverty, sometimes you feel that you're speaking out into the void, and you forget that there's other people around you who do feel the same way or who are seeing the same thing. So I think that coming together as a collective and again, making it's easier to have 10 voices be heard as opposed to one voice being heard. So I think that the collaboration within the community and within the community organizations and the people who are experiencing poverty is very meaningful, and will get us further than just you sitting as an individual and writing an email to your elected representative. So I do think that there's power in numbers, and that's the best way to get the point across.
Thanks, Savannah. John, do you wish to add anything?
No, that's the point. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending this tonight, and the panelists especially for coming, and Sharon for giving a description about SHENLA's work and the report itself. Sharon, is there anything that you want to say before?
I just really appreciate the panel's discussion of the issues, and it was informative, and I think it's helpful to hear what was useful in the report, and I think we are gaining some momentum that we need to move that forward, and we will be reaching out to you to work on that. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.